Linda, I hope you do a great job and put yourself out of a job. I want her to put herself out of a job. Education Department.
All right, and a move that seems to portend the beginning of the end for the department, that Republicans, going back to Reagan, pledged to abolish. The Department of Education today told staffers to vacate their offices by 6 p.m. because the offices were closing nationwide. The doors are now locked. Workers aren't going to be allowed back into the buildings until at least Thursday. Is this the first step on the road to a total shutdown?
Yes, actually it is, because that was the president's mandate, his directive to me, clearly is to shut down the Department of Education, which we know we'll have to work with Congress, to get that accomplished. But what we did today was to take the first step of eliminating what I think is bureaucratic bloat. And that's not to say that a lot of the folks, it's a humanitarian thing too. A lot of the folks that are there, they're out of a job. But we wanted to make sure that we kept all of the right people and the good people to make sure that the outward-facing programs, the grants, the appropriations that come from Congress, all of that are being met. And none of that's going to fall through the crack.
Oh, they so blithely just want to dismantle the Department of Education, impacting millions and millions of children, 50 million children at least, and billions of dollars with just the blithe, well, we're going to dismantle it. Oh, we're going to put ourselves out of business. Oh, this is the beginning of chloroforming and taking out in the back and shooting the Department of Education. Not so fast. Not so fast. They're like it's a James Bond movie, and these are the evil people living in the mountain lair. Letitia James and 19 other states, she represents New York, have banded together once again. I call them the Gang of 20. And they're banding together time and time again, filing injunction suit after injunction suit against the administration, and they're winning. And they got a new one that they just filed in Massachusetts federal court. I'll talk to you a little bit why we're filing these kind of suits in Massachusetts and Maine, in New Hampshire, in California, and in New York, in New Jersey, Maryland, and the District of Columbia. And we're avoiding red states. We'll talk about that at the end. But let me read to you from a quote from Letitia James. This is the not on my watch moment. Letitia James is the bane of Donald Trump's existence, right? She's the one that brought him low, proved that his business operations were a sham, a fraud, a house of cards. Got a $450 million civil fraud judgment against those companies in New York, putting him out of business, putting a monitor, a former federal judge, over the Trump organization to this moment. So there's no love lost between Letitia James and Donald Trump, I assure you. That hasn't stopped Letitia James from being at the forefront, the tip of the spear against the Trump administration. Here's her quote upon the filing of the lawsuit that she led. This administration may claim to be stopping waste and fraud, but it is clear that their only mission is to take away the necessary services, resources, and funding that students and their families need. Firing half of the Department of Education's workforce will hurt students throughout New York and the nation, especially low-income students and those with disabilities who rely on federal funding. Time out for a minute. That's you, rural states. That's you, poor states. That's you, red states. Who do you think the Department of Education helps? The rich parents on the Upper West Side or Upper East Side of Manhattan? But I digress. Back to Letitia James's statement today, along with her lawsuit. This outrageous effort to leave students behind and deprive them of a quality education is reckless and illegal. Today, I am taking action to stop the madness and protect our schools and the students who depend on them. Let me just give you the gravity of this. There's probably no other department, including social services, Social Security, that touches the America life more in a positive way than the Department of Education, formed in 1979 by Congress. Just hear the numbers. 50 million students, K through 12, are under the auspices of the Department of Education and receive billions and billions of dollars of funding through their states and through their local school systems. There are 98,000 public schools. There are 32,000 private schools. There are 18,000 school districts. There are another 12 million who are in higher education. There's an entire department that's now been completely shuttered and dismantled and chloroformed related to civil rights and discrimination and harassment and abuse in the school systems, something Donald Trump doesn't care about. I thought his administration and his wife are all about stopping cyberbullying. Where do you think that starts? That starts with the Department of Education and its Civil Rights Division. And now New York, who has been harmed by the complete shuttering of the Department of Education, in effect, it received more than $6 billion worth of aid last year for its school students. That's just New York alone. Now, this gang of 20 that I'm proud to talk about, have joined together 6 or 7 other times to sue Donald Trump under birthright citizenship, and they won. Against Elon Musk going through the Treasury Department servers and websites, and they won. Against they're trying to dismantle the National Institute of Health, and they won. And about mass firings of federal employees, and they won. They're batting over 900 against the Trump administration, even better than they did the first time around, because Donald Trump is worse than the first time around. This lawsuit that's been brought is simple in its elegance about the claims that it's bringing, because every lawsuit is the same. You have the general allegations, you have the jurisdiction and venue allegations, you have the parties, who are the parties allegations, and then you get to the meat of the order, and that's the claims in federal court. Here, there's only 4 claims, but they're so powerful. Separation of powers have been violated by Donald Trump by trying through a reduction in force, a phony reduction in force. We call it a RIF, to put the Department of Education out of business. You just saw the clip. That's been his goal, because that's Project 2025's goal. It's right there. We had the playbook while he was running for office. It said the complete dismantling of the Department of Education. Okay. Well, he's obeying his masters in the Project 2025 Heritage Foundation world, who helped get elected, and he is paying off a campaign debt. Even if it means, by doing so, he is completely undermining our public education system and the dignity that goes along with that, to make sure that everybody has a fair shake in our society, which they don't care about, goes along with their desire to get rid of diversity, equity, and inclusion at every stage of the game. So separation of powers, that the first argument in their claim in this new lawsuit is that there's been a usurpation of the legislative authority, that Congress set up this particular Department of Education for a reason in 1979. And funded it for a reason. And Donald Trump can't, through executive action or non-action or reductions of force or putting Linda McMahon, a meat puppet, into that position from her days in the World Wrestling Federation, of all things. Can't do by reduction in force and violate congressional mandates. In other words, the law. And that leads us to the second claim in the case, separation of powers. That means that they've argued that he's violating the take care clause, that the executive branch must take care to faithfully execute the laws. The laws are set by Congress. And they cite in their own complaint lawsuit dicta and precedent going back in the Supreme Court to the 1800s with the first Supreme Court Justice John Marshall, who says it is Congress who sets the law. The president may be able to fill in some of the details, but the law, the guiding post, the pole star is Congress. Not faithfully not executing the laws in order to cut the legs out from under a congressional statute and the creation of this Department of Education. Third, that his actions are ultra vires. That's a fancy way of saying that it is outside the norm. He's coloring outside the lines of his executive power given to him by the Constitution. It is not only irregular, but illegal, ultra vires. And lastly, as we've said before, almost every one of these cases has the same type of blueprint, that Donald Trump has violated the Administrative Procedures Act, which deals with administrative agencies and departments like the Department of Education, by having Linda McMahon make an arbitrary and capricious, that's the term, decision to cut, without regard to impact on the states, half of the workforce, telling them to go home and lock the door and shut the door. You heard it in her interview at the top of this hot take. I'm hot at the top of this hot take. So I see the lawsuit, and I'll tell you why it's been filed in Massachusetts, because we know how to take a page out of the Republicans' book for years, to be the bane of Biden's existence and his policies. They filed their lawsuits, and where were they filed? Occasionally in D.C., but Texas, Louisiana, and Florida, in order to get to favorable, and their most favorable appellate court, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals out of New Orleans, which sits over Texas, Louisiana, and others, Mississippi and the like. That's where those cases came from. Our cases are going to come from New Hampshire and Massachusetts and Maine and New Jersey and Maryland and the District of Columbia, where about half the cases are, and California and New York. And even when Letitia James is leading as the New York Attorney General, banding together with the other 20 states, and I'll just shout out, see if you can figure out the common denominator of these 20 states. Leave it in my comments. New York, Massachusetts, California, Hawaii, Arizona, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, DC, the district, Illinois, Maine, Maryland, Michigan, Nevada, Minnesota, New Jersey, Oregon, Rhode Island, Vermont, state of Washington, state of Wisconsin. Mainly blue states, maybe not at the electoral time, but certainly their attorney general is blue, their governor is blue, and maybe one or both chambers of their legislation body is blue. And so they're joining together. This is the 5th or 6th time that Letitia James has brought a case like this and has been successful. You know, we talked about it. Birthright citizenship, stopping federal workers from being fired, stopping Elon Musk and Doge from going through the Treasury Department servers, all because of Letitia James's leadership. So what's going to happen next? Massachusetts judge, federal judge, going to hold a hearing on the temporary restraining order to determine whether they have standing as states, which is the fundamental issue that you have to prove to a court in order for the court to exercise jurisdiction. You have to show that a federal judge has a live case or controversy, that's the term of art, in front of him in order to rule. They have standing. They've been injured. It's called a pocketbook injury, and it's what it sounds like. Their wallets and pocketbooks, their budgets, the funding has been cut off, and therefore they've been specially injured. They have standing. So even though the Trump administration will argue no standing, they're going to blow by that threshold requirement pretty quickly. Then it's going to go to irreparable harm, because for an injunction, unlike the regular substance of a merit-based lawsuit, you got to prove that you have a harm that is so distinct in character that it can't be compensated later by money, because something has to happen now to stop an ongoing issue. There has to be an ongoing future harm. In other words, not a completed harm. Something that's going to happen in the future, again, the continued dismantling of the Department of Education and attempts to defund it. And then you have to have the judge make the determination that that qualifies as irreparable harm. It's like toothpaste out of the tooth tube kind of thing, eggs that can't be unscrambled, that kind of thing. And then you have inadequate remedy at law, which is similar to that. And then lastly, that the parties are likely to prevail on proving their case at the end of the trial. The judge looks at it now, kind of peeks under the hood and says, yes, you are more likely than not. You are likely to prevail on the merits of your case to prove the Constitutional Administrative Procedure Act violations that you're alleging. I will grant you the temporary restraining order. Some people think it's easy to get a TRO. It looks like it's like pulling a number at your local supermarket at the deli counter. Boom. Because there's so many of them against the Trump administration. They're very hard to get. In 35 years of my practice, I've gotten about 5. Yeah. And I've probably been denied double that. Doesn't mean your case is terrible. Doesn't mean you're not going to win ultimately at your case, at trial, or with a judge, or with a jury or a judge or an arbitrator or something. It just means at that moment, you don't have the unique, extraordinary elements necessary to obtain this type of extraordinary relief from a judge. And you may not think it's extraordinary because there's been about 6 a week issued against the Trump administration. He's averaging about 12 to 15 lawsuits a week. But it is extraordinary and it is hard. But I think they get the temporary restraining order here to stop the future chloroforming and dismantling of the Department of Education, where they take them out in the back and try to shoot it. Or, as Letitia James in her lawsuit alleged, through a phony reduction in force, act like they're just cutting out fraud and waste, when they're not. They've cut through the fat, through the muscle, through the bone, and into vital organs, I guess is the best way to put it. TRO happens, hearing, temporary restraining order issued, set the case for trial, set the case for preliminary injunction, which in the food chain of stays or blocks by a federal judge, it starts with administrative stay. I need a few more days to even see your briefing. I'm not making a decision on the merits at all. Administrative stay. Next level up. I've seen your papers on temporary restraining order. You've made out movement, the states here. You've made out your 4 elements to obtain a temporary restraining order. Irreparable harm, inadequate remedy at law, likelihood of success on the merits, and the balance of equities or in public interest tips in your favor. Yes, boom, done. That holds the ring for the case and stops the government from doing something or forces them to do something for the next briefing schedule. Preliminary injunction, maybe a week or two or a month later with the injunction in place. Preliminary injunction, similar factors, full or complete record, case law argument, judge either enters the preliminary injunction or not. Sometimes it's converted into a permanent injunction because the judge finds on summary judgment there's no disputed facts, it's just the law, and that person can issue a ruling without having to go through a full-blown trial, or certainly not a jury trial. This is all judge-made law. So that's the hierarchy that we will get to. As soon as it gets to a temporary restraining order level, it then, once that's entered, and certainly once that's entered, and usually at the preliminary injunction level, appellate jurisdiction kicks in, and then you can go off and try to take an emergency appeal to your various appellate courts. So I think that's what's going to happen here. Donald Trump's not going to like this. He's going to get a TRO against him. There's going to be a preliminary injunction against him. He's going to run out and try to get the First Circuit, which just ruled against him big time on birthright citizenship, a new 3-judge panel of the First Circuit up in that area, up in Massachusetts, is going to issue its ruling. He'll take that to the United States Supreme Court through a moderate justice of the Supreme Court, because that's who sits over the First and over Massachusetts. Another good reason to file there. And then we'll see if there's any ability to count to 4 or 5 at the United States Supreme Court level to hear this case on an emergency application. We'll cover it all. That's one of the things we do well. We post these issues to you. We put them on your radar. We explain it to you in this way. And then we follow up and follow through in a way that, of course, mainstream media and corporate media can't, and doesn't want to, and is afraid to. We're not. And I'm glad you're here. I'm Michael Popok. You're on the Legal AF YouTube channel. Take a moment, hit the subscribe button. We just rolled the odometer to 500,000 subscribers, well on our way to where? Yes, 1 million before our 1-year birthday. And that, with your help, we're going to get there. Appreciate all of you. I'm Michael Popok reporting. In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories, the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.